Hello, everyone. How you doing today? This is for Daniel Jackson, aka Farmer Fredo. I'm the executive director for Flint River Fresh, and I want to welcome you guys to our planting a fall garden webinar. So basically, what we're going to do today is just give you some of our tips or keys to success to have a successful fall garden. This is part of our fall gardening series, so please make sure that you follow us on social media, stay connected to us on the web. You can find other gardening workshops and things that we're doing. Going to flintriverfresh.org/new-events. And you can also just like click on our webpage to find out other do-it-yourself sort of resources like this that will further help you expand to become a food gardener, a community gardener, or a backyard gardener, or a school gardener. So let us begin. So first thing first, I tell everybody that when it comes to your fall garden, even though it's a fall garden, you really do most of your planting during a small window that begins in late summer, going all the way through to the end of July, end of August, maybe even like that first weekend after Labor Day. To tell people the window of planting really takes place July 20th through August the 31st. And each plot has a spectrum over like a 6-week period when you really want to get your fall crops into the ground so you can have a bountiful harvest coming into October, going into November. But the blessing that we have here in our part of the United States, Southwest reasons why at Flint River Fresh, you really get excited and trying to encourage people to grow food in their yard for their community, for their families, because you literally can grow around because of our climate. And like I said before, we're going to focus this workshop in particular about the fall cool season crops and the fall gardening season. So why should you have a fall garden? Number one, you have a longer harvest period for your like your cool season vegetables. And for those that have planted things like in February, you kind of know you have like the small window to harvest your cool crops before it gets too warm and things start to go to seed. And so you have a longer harvesting period. Like some of the stuff that we plant in August or towards September, you literally can harvest most of them throughout the winter months because it doesn't really get too cold. So it means you can have a bountiful harvest that's slowly producing and available for you. Then also, the fall gives you a do-over. So there might have been some things you planted in the springtime that didn't quite work out, whether it was the weather or just environment in general. But this just gives you another opportunity to go back to the well, go back to the garden bed, and start some new like crops, early spring crops. Here's opportunity to plant them again. And then also, one of the things that we encourage most people is that you don't want to have any real empty space. So by having this garden, it's a good use of open space in your garden to grow some fall crops that you might not have thought about that you really do. But then also the fall it's another opportunity for you like to stack up your pantry, to stack up your freezer, just like some good high quality vegetables that you grow like in your backyard. And then also some crops like we know kale, broccoli, collards in particular, they actually have like a better flavor during our winter months, during the cooler months than they do when it's extremely hot. And then the last thing, which is the one oftentimes I encourage people why they should do a fall garden, is there's less pest problems. The cabbage looper, a lot of the soft shell critters that are out there during the late summer, late springtime, they've kind of like went the rest is getting a little bit cooler. They're hibernating. I don't know. They're just not in the garden quite as much. So you have less pest pressure. And so by having less pest pressure, that's literally mean that you're going to utilize less chemicals to control like bugs and things in your garden. So everything has a stronger tendency to be more fresher with less like chemicals and things like that to control your pests. So what I've identified for the remainder of this talk, and what I like to call it like 7 keys to success for your fall garden. Each of these, I'm actually going to go a little bit deeper in this presentation, but the main ones are number one, sunlight. Veggie gardens need more, more sunlight than ever. Two, thinking about what type of garden that you want to have. Three, crop selection, choosing the right crops at the right time. Planting, different plants require different planting techniques. So just making sure that you know your different options that you can do. Of course, like I said, with crop selection, timing, planting things at the right time is a crucial key to your success. Water, water, water. Plants need that water to make sure, but also knowing how to water properly. And the last thing I like to touch upon is mulching. I'm encouraging people to do this more, especially in their backyard gardens or places. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper in each one of these points for the remainder of what I call the keys to success for your fall. So sunlight. So on average, vegetables need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. Oftentimes, I encourage people to go for 8. And the bigger the vegetables, the better the taste. And then also by building a stronger plant, you're also helping it naturally be able to fight off resistance against some insects pressure. So making sure that you find your location that's received 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. And if you have an option, we kind of prefer that sunlight to be during the cool of the day, so early in the morning to early afternoons, versus those that are like in the middle of the day when the heat is really like it's really intense. So if you have an option, make you just take a look at the spacing. We're looking at gardening at, and just pay attention to the how much sun it receives into the garden space. So number one, we really want to encourage that energy of the sun for your garden. Two, as you're thinking about your garden, I really want you to think about it in terms of like, what type of garden am I growing in? Am I doing it traditional with with farm rows, which is like what you see in the left hand corner? Just straight rows, everything is like laid out. Or am I looking at containers? So am I looking at recycling items, whether they're like totes, barrels, buckets, or am I looking at raised beds? And raised beds don't necessarily have to be wooden frame beds. They could be like cinder blocks, or they could be like on the ground in rows, but just kind of like spread out, where they're like 4 feet wide and a certain distance. So really thinking about what type of garden you have also factors into what your fall garden will look like. So just taking the time to think about your space, what type of area that you're working in, and what would be the best for you to maximize or optimize. So when we're thinking about growing, there are really like 2 ways I approach it for the fall. So you can look at it from the standpoint that this is the time for most of like your cool season crops to really like grow. But then also there's this window, what I think call like short season or like fast growing crops. So they kind of fit 2 categories. So like number one, your cool season ones are the ones that we know this is the right time of year for them. It'll take roughly from, like 5 to up to like 10 weeks for it to grow out. But then you have like your short season crop, those that grow in like 3 to 5 weeks from seed to table. And so this is a good opportunity to get both of those really like going into your garden space. So it really is like a criteria that we look at, just so timing is everything, but knowing exactly what season that you're in and what will thrive during those seasons. So for your cool season crops, things that you can get ready to prepare to plant. And what I like to do with this, I always show people what's available. And I just encourage people like to look at this list, circle some things that you think are your favorite. And I encourage you, if you're a beginning gardener, maybe pick like 2 or 3 off of this list that you want to try this year. And if you're like more experienced, you can do the whole smorgasbord. So right now, this season of fall, you can grow arugula, beets, broccoli, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, collards, Chinese cabbage like Napa. You can do your green onions for scallions. You also have an opportunity later on to plant them for bulbs, but it's a different technique. We do a whole nother workshop on that. Of course, kale, kohlrabi, lettuce, mustard greens, radish, snap peas. But we put on there you want to do more of the dwarf varieties, spinach, Swiss chard, tatsoi, and so these are the different crops. And as I explain to people, there's probably, in my opinion, a little bit more selections of things that you actually can plant for your fall garden than what you actually can plant for like your summer garden. So this really opens up the diversity in the landscaping of being a backyard or a community grower. But there is a couple exceptions. So one thing that we found doing a lot of these community garden plots, that you do have another opportunity to plant your squash, your zucchini, your cucumbers, and green beans. But more importantly, not just any green bean. We encourage people to plant more of the bush variety, just because the pole beans takes a little bit longer from seed to maturity. A lot of times, these things I've named, from the squash, zucchini, cucumbers, and green beans, they're literally ready from seed to table in about 55 days. So basically, in about a month and a half, a little over a month and a half, you can enjoy the fruits of these being planted, and it's like a short enough window that they will be ready before your first frost comes. And so these are things that we add, and then I should put a side note that we do also encourage in some of our garden space. If you have time during the 1st of July, going into like the 1st of August, that you can also have an window to plant another round of sweet corn, as well as beginning to session plant some of your southern peas and things like that as well. So when it comes to planting and growing, one thing that we encourage people to look at is think about your plant spacing. So we have like 3 ways that we encourage people to plant their crops. So number 1 is more the traditional in a straight line. You have so many inches or so many feet apart from the different crops. We give like instructions on how to do that. So you might be planting your collard plants 18 inches to 24 inches apart, or if you're doing a squash, like what I just mentioned, you might be putting it on 24 inches apart, like in a row, and your rows, everything from growing habits of what you're planting. And then also what we do a lot, we do like the school gardens and those that do raised garden beds, is that we encourage you to do what we call block gardens. So you're literally dividing up the garden space into like smaller squares, or kind of creating a proper spacing in between different crops is what you see in the very middle. So you might utilize it to, plant like your tomato plants. And we have those like in a 4x4 box. You can fit 4 tomato plants. And we literally just think about the spacing that each plant needs in order to grow, making sure that you've created the optimal amount of space for that to happen. But you might do it like in a smaller block, so that way your garden space can be diversified. So in addition to your cucumbers, you might say, hey, I want to grow some green beans, or I would like to add some herbs or things like that to the garden space. But it allows for a little bit more diversity because it's more intense. But you want to make sure that you're paying attention to how much spacing each plant really needs in order to grow. And I like to call it block planting, but then you also could just do what a lot of people do, which is just broadcasting. And that's literally just gently spreading your seeds out, like spreading them out in the general area. No like straight line, no block, no proper measurements. You just generally just sprinkle them out like the bottom, what a lot of people do with their salad mixes. People do it as well with their turnip greens and mustard greens, and even seeing them like with their carrots and stuff like that as well. So it's just like a simplified way for planting seeds. But this really only works with like seeds that only require for you to gently like bury them and just gently cover them up. If you have to like plant them a little bit deeper, such as your squash plants, your cucumbers, broadcasting is the way to go. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on this slide here. So the techniques of planting. So you kind of figured out that, hey, either I'm broadcasting, I'm in a straight line, but you just have to know how to plant seeds. So you have like the traditional way, which is like direct sow. That's literally you putting the seed in its space, burying it maybe like a half an inch, covering it back up, but you're properly spreading things out. It's literally, it's like you're totally using the seed to grow. But then you also have like transplants. So this is what most people do that are beginners, because you literally are going to like a nursery, purchasing some pre-established like plants that have already been grown, like in a greenhouse. And again, you're paying attention to your plant spacing. You're burying it to a particular like depth, but actually gives you more of a jump start. But then also you have to be mindful too, if the climate or the weather is warm, that you want to make sure that these are like staying moist, being watered. And then the other thing too is that if you are doing like the broadcasting method, or even if you are direct seeding, we kind of encourage people when they are direct seeding to put 2 to 3 seeds in a hole or in a mound when you're planting, and then as a group, as the seed emerges from the soil, germinates, then you actually like thin it out. So you might just leave one that you feel is the most hardiest of all the 2 or 3 seeds that you planted, and then you just thin it out and allow for like the root system itself to grow. Myself, I encourage people, rather than pulling out the one that you don't want, I encourage people, as what the picture shows, just take a pair of scissors and just kind of like cut and just leave the one that you want to have remain, the one that you won't, cut it at the soil level. And that's just because I always tell people that you have roots that are being established. Roots themselves can kind of give back to the soil organic matter, and also kind of help with the aeration and things like that. So I don't really encourage people to pull roots out. If I can, most of the time I try to allow the roots to stay in, especially when they're like small little baby plants. So another rule of thumb, if you are doing direct seeding and you are spaced out, is just a real simple rule of thought that you want to basically bury your seed double the diameter of the seed. So if you literally hold the seed in your fingertips, just take a look at it, pull it away, and that's literally how deep you want to bury your seed. And then the other thing I encourage people to do, you want to have some sort of mechanism to keep your seed bed moist, especially during that first 7 to 14 days, as a seed is really it's going through its process of breaking its outer shell and allowing for like its roots and things disperse to take root. You want to make sure you keep it wet, moist, because like if it dries out, you could actually end up damaging the plant that you're trying to grow. It won't germinate, it won't fill, and now you just have like a space that's empty. So you want to make sure you have some sort of mechanism to keep your bed moist and watered every day until like the seed germinates. Oftentimes I say until the seed starts to put on its first real true leaves. And you kind of notice that like it's like a difference in what the leaves look like when it's first again breaking out of the shell. So that's just a simple tip. If you are direct seeding, you're planting to the garden space of just kind of again double the diameter, and then also making sure that your seed bed stays moist until the seed germinates. And like I said, I like to keep my beds moist until it actually puts on its first set of true leaves. So timing is everything. So every crop actually has its own optimum planting window. So I gave you earlier on that you want to plant your summer crops between July 20th all the way up until like August 31st. But really, some crops have like a 2-week window that is the ultimate time for you to get that crop into the ground. And so it's very important that you know what the correct date is for that crop. Southwest Georgia, while weather patterns could change, it could be our first frost. Sometime it might not come until like December. And so if it has that sort of window, it kind of gives us a little bit of like leeway where we might can wait like a couple days or so or off of the optimal schedule to plant something. But what I encourage people to do is take the time to look at their 10-day forecast. Because obviously, if it's like 100 degrees outside, you really want to wait till when like the soil temperature is like in the 70s range, and outdoors like in his 90s or 80 range, things like that. So you really want to be a little bit cooler than, oh, it's like 100 degrees. But at the same time, if you're in that optimum window and you see that, hey, the time is getting past you, what they encourage people to do is like just go forward, just plant it, just nurse it, Just care for it and just make sure that you kind of pick like the best cooler day of all the days in that 10-day forecast to be the one to plant your seed or to do your transplants. And then what I like to do a lot is try to get my transplants planted um, in the evening time when it is a tad bit cooler and we're going into the cooler of the day, and just kind of making sure that in the morning, the next days, I'm actually making sure it stays water, it stays moist, and things like that. So here's just kind of like a quick snapshot. Again, we're in garden zone 8B. So this kind of gives you like a breakdown, like the different windows we were talking about for the different crops and things that you want to like get planted into the ground. So you see most of them have, like a 2 week or a 2 week or a 3 week sort of window for what's the optimum time to try to get the plants and stuff in the ground. If I didn't say this earlier, oftentimes I encourage people as well is that maybe if you are thinking about a fall garden, use this time right now to clean up your old garden bed, remove plants, get your ground and stuff prepped and ready to go. Because again, when the season comes to get these planted, you want to make sure that the space is ready so you can go ahead and drop your seed to put your plants and things into the ground. So again, this gives you like a broad spectrum. A lot of the stuff again is available on the Flint River Fresh website underneath our do-it-yourself resources. So you'll be able to pull down this list. And if you do stay in a garden zone, let's say you're in garden zone 7, you could just basically for the fall, you actually would start maybe 2 weeks earlier than us. And then if you're like in garden zone 9, you would start 2 weeks after us. So it kind of gives you like a broad range that you can work with in order to grow food for yourself and for your community. And here's just some, like, again, these are just basic starting points that we do for our garden spaces. And again, you can adjust it according to when your last expected frost date and things like this. And a lot of this is just really based upon the amount of days to maturity, because we like to make sure that we have about like 3 weeks to a month to be able to harvest a crop before the frost date really kicks in. And so, again, we're in Southwest Georgia. It's rough. It's really, really rough. And so some things you can just possibly do to deal with extreme heat. Of course, like I said earlier, is watch out for like the extended forecast. Like make sure that you are paying attention to what's going to happen in the next like 10 days as you're planning to plant. And then also, so that gives you an opportunity to like to look ahead and select, when is the weather optimum for you? Like just because I had on there like, August the 1st through August the 15th, you want to get something into the ground. Well, you might have like 7 days of rain. You have like another day where it needs to dry out. So just make sure you kind of pay attention to like the weather patterns in your area and things like that. And so, again, I'm going to emphasize if the weather doesn't get quite right, you want to just go ahead and get things into the ground by that last optimum planting date. And that's just to ensure that you have a harvest of crops that'll be available coming in October. Because one thing about the fall is that plants need as much sunlight as possible in order to, we encourage you to do, if you are going to do transplants, take a little bit of precaution to maybe put mulch around them or do a little bit more extra watering. You might have to water in the morning and afternoon, or you might have to install like some sort of shade protection if the heat is really, really, like really hot, if it's really hot. And then also just make sure that when you are establishing like seedlings or seeds, that you're, like I said, frequently watering the plants and keeping the roots moist around the base of the plant. And then sometimes we even had it where it's gotten so warm that we literally have to do some overhead watering just to keep our plants and things growing and thriving in the midst of like our summertime heat waves. So I said this before, and I'm emphasizing this again. You want to make sure that as you're getting ready for your fall garden, that you are truly, truly prepare for it. So that means removing all plant residue, weeds, previous crops, like clean out the space, start brand new. So any tilling, hand weeding, hoeing, make sure that you've done all of this work before you get into like the fall planting, because again, you have like this small window to get these seeds and transplants in the ground. So the cleaner your space, the better it'll be for you for success. And then also we encourage people as much as you can to compost, but also making sure that you're discarding plants that have like diseases. So we like in our compost in our public spaces, um, I don't really compost a lot of my summer crops, just because when it's come to like disease problems, my cucumbers, my squashes, my tomato plants get really hit hard through different diseases. So I don't like to incorporate that to my composting. Then also I try to stay away from things that have a lot of seeds in it. And so that's another reason why I just separate these items. And so I encourage people, you don't want that cycle to kind of keep repeating itself. All right. And so just going back again, I like to use my BCS, just breaking the ground and stuff up. And so one thing that we started doing is because it does get extremely hot. And then if you haven't worked the soil in a while, the soil itself is hard. And so what we encourage people to do on days that you know you're going to be removing plants and tilling the soil and the beds and stuff up, go ahead. If there hasn't been any like light rain, go ahead and give it like an overhead sort of showering to kind of weten up and moisten the soil a little bit. Because trust me, it makes it a lot easier to remove any old plants, to remove any weeds, and it also makes it easier for like your tiller or your broad fork to really be able to work that garden space with a little bit of water as you are preparing like the soil like spot. And again, that's just a little trick that we do because I've tore up plenty of garden hose trying to weed on Georgia clay, trying to weed a field on a paddock that feels like bricks and things like that. So just make sure you just take the time to prepare the land before you begin doing your fall plant. So watering, of course, we know watering is the key to all of this. But what we found too is that most of your water is lost through evaporation. And so that's one of the reasons why we kind of encourage a lot of like drip irrigation, or we try to find mechanism where people can water directly at the roots or where the plants and stuff are at, because roughly, I think it's like 75 or something like that percent of the water that you use is really lost through evaporation up into the air. And so that's another reason why we kind of encourage people to water either in the early part of the day or uh, the evening, depending on what type of plant. But try to put the water as you can on the soil to make sure that, because a lot of time the top inch or so will be really dry, but you go down about 2 inches or 3 inches where the roots are at, and there's still moisture there. So you just want to pay attention to that and make sure that you don't overwater. And so what we kind of encourage people is that if you're starving like younger plants, like I said, with seeds or seedlings, you want to give it more frequent sort of shallow waterings to kind of really get the roots of stuff going. Don't allow that top layer to like dry out. But if you have like an established older plants that are in established garden box or in the field, you literally just want to give it like a long, deep watering versus like shallow water. So you might really just water once to twice a week, but you might let it run for like an hour or two to really make sure that the bed is really soaked or your field is really like has enough water. And so just repeating again, what I said is that if you're watering seedlings or watering plants from seed, you want to water frequently. You want to water shallow, but most importantly, you don't want that soil to ever dry out. But if you're doing like transplant, same thing that we're doing for like seedlings and so forth. Frequently shallow, but we encourage people with your transplants to go ahead and put a little extra compost mulch around the base or straw mulch or whatever around each of the plants, just to kind of give it another way to keep the soil cool and for water to be retained. And I'm gonna talk more about that when I get to the mulching slide. But I just like a little trick that we do that once we plant our transplants, we add a little bit of like compost around the base of the plant or a little bit of straw if they're like tomato plants, so on and so forth, to really keep the moisture around the roots of the plants that they're getting established. And then if you have like an existing like garden space that's already thriving, that's making it, I would say looking good in the neighborhood. You want to just make sure that you water it deeply, like not as much, but just deep enough. Again, you don't want it to dry out, but you really want to make sure that the bed itself is given a deep watering, and that first like couple inches is moist. And then another way to keep it cool, to keep the water retained, is that you can mulch around or mulch the entire bed around like the plants and things like that. And so that's just something we really encourage a lot of community space is to do a lot more mulching because that helps minimize the amount of water that's lost to evaporation. It also helps regulate the soil temperature around like the base and things like that of your plant. So just something that we encourage people to do. And then people always ask us like, how long should you water your garden bed? And so roughly most plants need between 1 to 1.5 inches of water per week, especially when they're established. When they're younger, it's a little bit like less because you just really focus on keeping the soil moist. And so that equates to about 30 to 45 gallons of water is needed. And so how we encourage people to do it is to basically think about watering your garden bed. And this is like a 4x8 raised garden beds we do in our school gardens, but each of those beds roughly should be watered for 6 to 9 minutes. With it utilize like a handheld watering system. And then what we encourage people on a watering system, I use this picture, is we want people to use something that we call a shower wand. We're not a fan of like those multi-disc ones that you kind of can turn, that goes from like jet to mist to flood and has like shower on there. There's an actual one that's called like a shower one that kind of mimics like a soft rain. And so when you're dealing with like seeds or seedlings, you don't want to beat the plant up. So you literally want to give it like a soft watering and about 6 to 9. And so what we do is most of our garden spaces, we have like 6 to 9 or so raised beds. So we literally give each of those beds kind of rotate back and forth through them, a minute here, 2 minutes here, like some sort of timing system. So you're not basically standing in one spot for, like 10 minutes, it can be extremely long. And then the other thing we have in our garden spaces, we encourage people to also have some sort of rain gauge. So you kind of can monitor how much water is coming into your garden space. Because like, if you know that you receive, like 2.5 inches of water during the week, then you really don't have to water that garden space as much. And so just something to kind of pay attention to in gardening. And closing out, like what I spoke about, mulch, mulch, mulch. It's one of the most important things you can do to have a successful fall garden. Number one, the mulch protects your soil from the sun, the rain, the wind, the cold, but it helps build up beneficial organisms back into the soil as it breaks down. And then like if you leave your soil uncovered, it's basically allowing for like things like the leach off. It causes the soil to be hardened up. And then we encourage people, especially in the fall, because it's starting to happen, you can really utilize like leaves that are like falling down, shred them up, put them around like the base of your plant. It's really just a good natural mulch that's readily available. And then we also kind of encourage people as well, you can look at like grass clippings. So if you don't use chemicals out there in your yard, you can maybe use like a mulching bag to kind of capture the grass, spread around. And actually, we kind of prefer the grass clippings over straw. And when we're talking about straw, we're not talking about hay straw. We're talking like wheat straw that's been like bundled up. There might be a little bit of weed seeds in it, but they're very easy to kind of pull it up around like your garden space. And then also, if you're looking for something that's bagged, we like to call it gin trash or cotton compost. So this really comes from like the again, like in the cotton gin spaces. And we like to utilize this as a mulch around our garden space because again, it helps with water retention. It's light. It does come in a bag form. And it really does help out with controlling like the moisture levels and adding organic matter and things back into your soil. And so, but there are some bad mulches. And so I start off with the wood chips. I know wood chips and is readily like available. Most like people that cut down trees, they tend to have them like available to deliver to like your garden spaces. We kind of hold off from really using wood chips around our plants. What I mean by around is like literally in the area where our plants are at. We stay away from using wood chips unless it's like fruit trees, which are like perennials and things like that. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that like the wood chips themselves, they once as they're breaking down, they can tie up some of the nutrients and the nitrogen around like the vegetable plants and things that you're growing. And then also like with the wood chips, if you are your wood chips are things that are like by your house, your vegetable gardens by your house, there's a tendency for like termites and things like that to be with the wood chips. And so you don't necessarily want to introduce termites into like your backyard, that type of thing. And then also we don't encourage people to use like rubber mulch. I mean, I know there are ways that we're trying to protect the environment. And so we're looking at ways of what we can do with recycled tires and things like that. But again, this doesn't break down. And so part of like our garden spaces, we're rotating different crops, we're moving one plant to the next thing. So we want things that will break down, add organic matter and stuff like that. And then we also kind of encourage people to stay away from like the black plastic. And this is kind of like you see a lot of conventional farmers out there in their fields that are utilizing this as a mulch to keep the plants at bay. I mean, not plants, but to keep it weed free, things like that. But again, this is like a waste to the environment because a lot of times like is one and done with the black plastic. To really try to encourage people to like stay away from that. And so that really kind of concludes just again for this conversation today that we want to have about like how to have successful fall garden. So again, you can definitely stay connected with us on like social media. We're on Facebook or Instagram. And again, you can definitely follow us on our website, like I said before, because again, this is just part of our series that we're trying to make sure that everybody, our backyard growers, our neighbors, our friends can grow fresh fruits and vegetables exactly and stuff where you live at. So again, I just want to thank you for taking this moment to watch this webinar. And if you have any more information, please contact us on any of those platforms that are listed below. You guys have a great day. Talk with you later. Bye-bye.